When a homeless man approached Barron Trump, asking for just $1, no one could have predicted what would follow. What began as a simple act of kindness would ignite a nationwide movement, reunite a fractured family, and change lives forever. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Cars honked, pedestrians wove through the streets, and the hum of conversations filled the air. At the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, a man sat slumped against a wall of an old convenience store. His clothes were tattered, layers barely sufficient to shield him from the biting winter wind. Beside him, a worn-out cardboard sign read, "Anything helps, God bless." His name was Leonard, though few people ever bothered to ask. At 42, he had been living on the streets for nearly a year, a series of misfortunes stripping away everything he once held dear. Each day was uncertain. Sometimes a passerby would drop a few coins in front of him, but more often they simply walked past, avoiding his gaze. Leonard adjusted his beanie and shivered, his eyes scanning the endless stream of shoes moving past him. High heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Then, out of the corner of his eye, something different caught his attention. A pair of pristine white sneakers stopping just a few feet away. They weren't just expensive. They were the kind of shoes worn by someone truly young and privileged. Curiosity sparked in Leonard as he glanced up. Standing before him was a teenager, tall and composed, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of a sleek jacket. Leonard squinted against the sunlight, recognizing the face but unable to immediately place it. The boy stood at the corner, scrolling through his phone, seemingly unaware of the attention he was attracting. Around them, people whispered, some discreetly pulling out their phones to take pictures. Leonard hesitated. He rarely approached anyone unless they made eye contact first. But there was something different about this boy. He wasn't in a rush like everyone else. There was a quiet observation in his stance, a calmness that felt out of place in the chaotic city. Taking a breath, Leonard spoke up, his voice dry from the cold. "Hey, young man," he called out, forcing a smile. "Can you spare $1?" The boy froze mid-scroll, tilting his head slightly as if to confirm he had heard correctly. Slowly he turned to face Leonard, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to slow. Leonard braced himself for rejection. He was used to it. But what happened next was far from ordinary. "What do you need it for?" the boy asked, his voice calm yet firm. The question caught Leonard off guard. It wasn't condescending or dismissive, but there was a weight to it, as if the boy genuinely wanted to know. Leonard's throat tightened. He hadn't expected a conversation. "Well," he started, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "A cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich, if I'm lucky." His voice wavered. Being questioned like this was unsettling. But there was no malice in the boy's tone, only curiosity. The boy stepped closer, his phone now forgotten in his pocket. Leonard felt the eyes of others on them, silent judgment from bystanders wondering why someone like this young man would waste his time on someone like him. Leonard wanted to shrink away, to escape the embarrassment, but the boy's steady gaze held him there. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Leonard," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy nodded slightly, his brow furrowing, as if processing something far beyond just this moment. "Barron," he said simply. There was no arrogance, no air of self-importance in his introduction, just unexpected sincerity. The city's hum resumed, yet something had shifted in the air. That brief exchange felt charged, as if it were the beginning of something much bigger. Leonard shifted uneasily on the cold pavement, unsure of how to respond. Barron's presence was unlike anything he had encountered before. Most people ignored him, averted their gaze, or tossed some loose change without a word. But here was this young man, not just stopping but actually talking to him, as if he were an equal. Barron crouched down to Leonard's level. The movement startled Leonard. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his tone calm but direct. Leonard hesitated. Sharing his story wasn't something he usually did. People didn't care about the reasons, just the spectacle of his misfortune. But there was something disarming about Barron's presence. "Almost a year now," Leonard admitted. "Lost my job when the plant shut down. Then my health declined. Couldn't keep up with rent." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened intently, his eyes narrowing, not in judgment but in focus. It was an expression Leonard wasn't used to, a mix of curiosity and genuine concern, as if the teenager was piecing together a puzzle in his mind. Leonard sensed the growing tension in the crowd around them. People were watching, whispering, some even stopping out of sheer curiosity, intrigued by the sight of the young Trump heir crouched beside a homeless man. "What about family?" Barron asked. Leonard's jaw tightened. He shook his head. "Don't have much of that anymore," he muttered. "My folks passed away years ago. My brother, well, we haven't spoken in ages." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Not much left to lose when you've already lost it all." Barron was silent for a moment, as if carefully considering Leonard's words. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had only asked for $1, just one. But Barron's movement suggested something else. When his hand emerged, he wasn't holding a single bill, but a crisp $100 note. The sight made Leonard blink in disbelief. "Here," Barron said, extending the bill toward him. "This should cover more than coffee." Leonard stared at the money, stunned. For a moment, he couldn't move. It wasn't just about the amount, it was the gesture itself. "Are you serious?" Leonard finally managed to ask. His voice wavered, cracking under the weight of emotion. "Why would you do that?" Barron gave a small shrug, his expression unreadable. "Because I can." The simplicity of his response left Leonard momentarily speechless. Before he could find the right words, Barron leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "But listen," he added, his tone softer now. "This isn't just about the money. I need you to promise me something." Leonard's grip on the bill tightened, as if afraid it might disappear. "What's that?" he asked cautiously. Barron's expression turned serious, his gaze unwavering. "If I help you today, you have to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" A lump formed in Leonard's throat. The words struck deeper than he expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone wasn't just offering him a handout, they were challenging him to take control, to climb out of the pit he had fallen into. He swallowed hard, then nodded, unable to speak. "Good," Barron said, standing up with ease. He glanced around, unfazed by the growing number of people watching. Leonard, however, felt his face grow hot as he noticed cell phones pointed in their direction, capturing the moment. He wasn't sure whether to feel grateful, humiliated, or both. Barron reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a pen and a small notepad. Scribbling something quickly, he tore off a piece of paper and handed it to Leonard. "Go to this address tomorrow morning. They'll help you. Tell them Barron sent you." Leonard unfolded the note, his hands trembling slightly. It was the address of a local shelter and resource center, one he had heard of before but had been too ashamed or too proud to visit. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Barron added, his voice steady. Something shifted in the air between them. Leonard clutched the note and the bill tightly. This wasn't just an act of kindness. It was something more. A flicker of hope in the darkness that had surrounded him for too long. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Leonard sat motionless, staring at the $100 bill and the small note as if they were foreign objects. His mind raced, caught between disbelief and cautious optimism. Barron didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stood there, watching Leonard with an intensity that made him uneasy. It was clear he wasn't just giving him money and walking away. He was waiting for something. An answer, a decision. Leonard cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. Why? Why do you care? You don't even know me. Barron tilted his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Because everyone has a story, Leonard. Yours just hasn't been told yet. He glanced around at the murmuring crowd, then back at Leonard. And honestly, if I have the ability to do something good, why wouldn't I? Leonard exhaled slowly, caught off guard. He'd heard plenty of empty words before, but something about Barron's voice, the conviction in it, felt different. Even so, doubt still gnawed at him. You don't owe me anything, Leonard said, his voice firmer now. People don't just stop to help without expecting something in return. Barron crouched down again, leveling his gaze with Leonard's. I don't expect anything, but I do believe small actions can lead to something bigger. He gestured toward the note in Leonard's hands. That place. They have resources, job programs, counseling, whatever you might need. All I'm asking is that you show up. Leonard swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He glanced at the address again, the neat handwriting standing out against the worn paper. He wanted to believe this was real, but after years of disappointment, hope had become a dangerous thing. And what if I fail? Leonard muttered, barely above a whisper. What if I mess it all up? Barron's expression softened and he shook his head slightly. Everyone messes up, Leonard, but giving up? That's the only way you truly lose. The words were simple, yet they hit with a force Leonard hadn't expected. For a moment, the noise of the city faded. All that remained was the quiet weight of Barron's words, the steady confidence behind them. The crowd around them had thickened. Phones were no longer discreetly raised, they were openly recording. A hushed voice among the bystanders murmured, "Is that Barron Trump?" Leonard felt a wave of unease wash over him. This sudden attention was overwhelming. He had spent years being ignored, invisible to the world. Now, in an instant, he was at the center of something much bigger than himself. Barron, however, remained completely unfazed. If anything, he seemed to thrive under the weight of the moment, his composure unshaken. He turned back to Leonard, his voice calm. "Ignore them." Leonard blinked, startled. "This is about you and me. No one else matters right now." A strange sense of relief settled over him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he wasn't just another face lost in the crowd. Someone saw him, really saw him, and cared enough to listen. Leonard took a deep breath. "All right," he said at last, his voice steadier now. "I'll go. I'll show up." Barron's face lit up with a genuine smile. "That's all I wanted to hear." He stood up, brushing off his knees. The onlookers whispered amongst themselves as he turned to leave, but before he stepped away, he glanced back one last time. "And Leonard," he said, his voice louder now, as if addressing more than just him, "you've got more strength in you than you realize. Don't forget that." Leonard sat there, his mind spinning. Gratitude, embarrassment, disbelief. It was all tangled together. He wanted to say something, to thank him, but the words just wouldn't come. Instead, he simply nodded, his fingers tightening around the note. A lifeline. As Barron walked away, the crowd parted for him. Their whispers followed, their curiosity lingering. Leonard watched him disappear into the sea of people. And for the first time in years he felt something stir inside him. Hope. His gaze drifted back to the note, his heart pounding. Tomorrow. The first step. The next morning, Leonard stood outside the address Barron had given him, a modest brick building on a quieter side of Cleveland. He hesitated, inhaling sharply. Then, gripping the note in his pocket, he stepped forward. The entrance bore a simple sign, Hope Outreach Resource Center. A steady stream of people filtered in and out, some carrying bags of groceries, others wearing the same uncertain expression that Leonard now found on his own face. His fingers instinctively traced the edges of the note in his pocket, a physical reminder that this moment was real. The $100 bill still rested securely in his jacket. A part of him wanted to hold on to it, as if keeping the money would somehow preserve the kindness he had received the day before. But another part, the part that had stirred at Barron's words, whispered that this wasn't just about money. It was about a chance to start over. Taking a deep breath, Leonard stepped inside. The warmth of the building was immediate, a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside. At the front desk sat a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. She looked up from her work as he approached. "How can I help you today?" Leonard hesitated, then slowly pulled the note from his pocket and slid it across the counter. Barron sent me. He said I should come here." Her eyes flicked to the paper, and recognition softened her expression. A knowing smile spread across her face. You must be Leonard. We've been expecting you." She stood and motioned for him to follow. "Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours passed in a blur. Leonard met with a caseworker who listened to his story without judgment, laying out a plan to help him get back on his feet. A temporary bed in the shelter, a scheduled doctor's appointment to address his health concerns, a connection to a job training program. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, it felt as though the broken pieces of his life were being carefully gathered and put back together. That evening, as he sat on the edge of his cot, Leonard replayed the events of the past 24 hours. The kindness of a stranger, the chance to be seen. Barron's words echoed in his mind, the promise he had made weighing on his heart. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, Leonard believed it was possible. Meanwhile, beyond the shelter's walls, Barron's gesture had begun to ripple further than either of them could have imagined. A bystander had recorded their interaction, and overnight, the video had gone viral. It spread across social media like wildfire, capturing the attention of millions. Headlines praised the young Trump heir's unexpected act of generosity. The footage showed Barron kneeling beside Leonard, handing him the bill, speaking words of encouragement that resonated deeply with viewers. Some labeled it a publicity stunt. Others debated whether the act was genuine or simply a privileged young man's moment in the spotlight. But regardless of opinion, one thing was clear. The video had struck a nerve. People from all walks of life reached out to Hope Outreach Resource Center, offering donations and support, inspired by what they had witnessed. While the world debated the meaning of Barron's actions, Leonard remained oblivious to the attention. He was focused on something far more important, the steps ahead. Attending his first counseling session, filling out job applications, learning slowly to believe in himself again. That night, as Leonard lay down in the shelter, the weight of the past year seemed a little lighter. Out there somewhere, the young man who had stopped to help him was making waves. But Leonard's focus remained simple. Take it one day at a time. Honor the promise he had made. By the end of the week, Leonard began to notice subtle changes, both within himself and in the world around him. At the shelter, the staff treated him with warmth and encouragement, reminding him that his story was far from over. Word of his journey spread quietly within the community. Others who had struggled in silence began approaching him, inspired by his willingness to take that first step. "If you can do it, maybe I can too," one man said, patting Leonard on the back. The gesture, simple as it was, filled Leonard with an unfamiliar sense of pride. Outside the shelter, however, Leonard's story was no longer quiet. The video of his moment with Barron had exploded across social media, racking up millions of views in just a few days. News outlets picked up the story, dissecting every detail. Commentators debated whether Barron's actions were selfless or performative, while countless users flooded online spaces with their own opinions. Privilege with a purpose, one tweet read. This is how you use it for good. Another user wrote, it's sad that kindness like this is so rare it shocks us, but kudos to Barron for proving it's possible. Leonard only learned of the attention when a shelter staff member showed him the video. Watching himself on screen, Leonard felt a strange mix of emotions. Embarrassment, gratitude, and something he couldn't quite name. The hollow-eyed man in the footage looked unfamiliar. It was a stark reminder of how far he had fallen, and perhaps how far he could rise. Barron, meanwhile, remained silent about the growing buzz. He turned down interview requests, ignored public statements, brushed off the online noise. To him, this wasn't about soaking up praise. It was about Leonard. Behind the scenes, Barron quietly ensured that Hope Outreach Resource Center received enough donations to expand its programs and help even more people in need. His gesture had sparked something larger. Across the country, people began sharing their own acts of kindness, tagging them with hashtags like Kindness Challenge and Pay It Forward. Local shelters reported an increase in donations. Volunteers signed up in droves. It was a movement born from a single moment between two people. For Leonard, the ripple effect became something even more personal. One evening, as he sat in the shelter's common room, a man approached hesitantly. "Leonard," the man asked. Leonard looked up, his brow furrowing as he tried to place the familiar face. Then it hit him. "Paul?" His voice trembled. Standing before him was his younger brother, the one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The two men stared at each other, the weight of lost years hanging between them. "I saw the video," Paul admitted, sitting beside him. I didn't know things had gotten so bad for you. I should have reached out sooner." Leonard shook his head, emotion tightening his throat. "It's not your fault. I didn't exactly make it easy for anyone to find me." Paul placed a firm hand on Leonard's shoulder. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The reunion was bittersweet, a reminder of everything lost, but also of everything that could still be rebuilt. For Leonard, it was another step toward healing, not just his circumstances, but his relationships and his sense of self. As the weeks passed, Leonard's perspective shifted. He no longer saw his story as a tragedy, but as proof of resilience. There was still a long road ahead, but he was no longer walking it alone. And though Barron had given him money, he had also given him something far more valuable: hope.